Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore, continuing our discussion with Michael Lighty about the response of the trade unions and progressive forces to the Trump coming presidency. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Paul.
So just quickly, Michael is the Director of Public Policy for the National Nurses United and the California Nurses Association. Seems to be sort of two strategies here, and they sometimes come together and sometimes they seem not to. You had a conference in Chicago just before the Democratic Party convention,
Yeah.
I guess it was. And it seemed to sort of come together. There was a vision of building a movement with an electoral strategy, and it was to continue the Sanders movement with the Democratic Party. Now, as Trump is elected, we're seeing spontaneous outbursts of protests and rallies across the country, thousands and thousands of people. But it doesn't seem like there's an act two for that. How do the nurses envision their role, and what do you imagine needs to be done in terms of a movement that doesn't get, whittled away and diffuse again with some kind of electoral strategy?
The nurses very much see themselves as constituency and as workers who can talk to other workers about the need to heal America, and that the healing of America is something that goes beyond party. And that it's true that we work with Senator Sanders and we obviously endorse a lot of Democrats, but we are not wedded to the Democratic Party per se. And we certainly, in many cases, engage in independent politics too. So the nurses are in a unique position to be able to speak to folks, whether they voted for Secretary Clinton or voted for President Trump, frankly. So we see the nurses as in a leadership role to really promote a vision of equality and justice based upon nurse values of caring, compassion, and community. And we think a value-driven demand that has specific programs like improved Medicare for all, like green jobs and a just transition from the fossil fuel economy, like a healthcare system that is based upon patient need, not corporate profit, that all those kind of economic justice demands can speak to workers, whether they are, of whatever party they're in. So we see that, number one. We do see the importance of movement and electoral politics working together. And one of the characteristics of a movement, of course, is that a lot of stuff like those spontaneous demonstrations happen. That's what a movement is. A lot of stuff happens in a decentralized way. And after Occupy, we're working with those folks, People for Bernie, folks who were really instrumental in the barnstorming and unique digital outreach that was done during that campaign. We need to use those techniques combined with mass organizing, and that we have to exist both in the virtual and physical worlds with common themes. And we believe that the Heal America is at the center of that.
One of the things that seems to have happened more in Europe, to some extent in Latin America, or maybe more in Latin America in some ways, is there's moments where the whole of the progressive politics, or the preponderance of it, gets under a united front with an electoral mission and a movement that jive. And it's in the U.S. and frankly in Canada too. It's always so segmented.
Yes.
And there's this idea of a broad national united front never seems to really take shape. The Sanders moment started to feel like that for the first time.
I think that's right. Yeah. No, I think that was the unique experience for folks involved in the Sanders campaign that they had not had before. It's like, wow, we're all working with all these people who agree but are not working on my issue. We're all working on different issues, but we're all about the same thing. I think that was a unique experience for certainly this generation of progressives. And we do need that united front. And we're prepared, and we want to work with all these organizations who maybe they have a foot in the virtual world more than, community organizing, but we're going to work with both. I think there's a question about, well, what is it going to take to get these state legislatures back? And I think what we're all clear, and where there's a real unity of vision, is that we have to reject neoliberalism. We have to reject the primacy of the free market, the deferral to market mechanisms. We have to reject privatization. We have to reject, corporate tax breaks and other prerogatives of corporate power, including corporations are not people and they should not dominate our elections. They have to be eliminated from them. A lot of common points of unity. So I think we are in a position to create something that is an ideological challenge to this authoritarian neoliberalism that Trump represents, despite his position on trade. I think he still believes, obviously, in the primacy of the market and privatization and corporate prerogatives. And we can contrast that, and I think we have a unity to do so. What we have to do is we have to purge what would be called Clintonism, and because it has hurt us. And we have to, if we're essentially defending the status quo, that is not going to transform politics, and it's not going to build a Democratic majority. We have to go beyond what has been the Democratic politics since Bill Clinton was elected.
There's been a lot of argument and debate about Bernie Sanders' endorsement of Clinton. And actually, to my mind, the debate was more how he did it than whether he should do it. I mean, I personally understand for tactical reasons. Well, first of all, he said he was going to, and he wound up doing what he said he was going to do.
Man of his word.
Yeah, and I understand for strategic and tactical reasons why he was so full-throated in the support. But I think it didn't help in the long run for the same reason that it winds up, even in the primaries, to a large extent, he winds up defending the Obama legacy. Like he critiques Hillary. Will you promise Hillary not to have a Wall Street team as your finance team? And then he'll praise President Obama's handling of the financial crises with a Wall Street team. And we all know that was handled in a way that benefited the top 1 percentile. Yes, it stopped the Great Recession becoming the Great Depression, and there's something to that. He could have gone more the European austerity style, and then it would have been a complete disaster. But that being said, he did not handle that in anything akin to a progressive fashion. Yet Bernie, again, for tactical reasons, is very reticent in the campaign to critique President Obama. And then he doesn't, there's no one in the movement that can step into Sanders' shoes and say, yes, using Bernie's language, Hillary is not confronting the oligarchy. And again, Bernie, in an interview with me and others, but he said with me just 2 weeks before he kind of lost, he said, I asked him, will your followers support Hillary? And he said, well, only if she confronts the oligarchy, which, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we know she is part of the oligarchy. But there was no one there to say, yeah, vote for Hillary because Trump is more dangerous, but she is, and she's part of the oligarchy, and don't, and so that there's a voice there that can attack what's wrong, instead of even some of the progressive magazines. I think The Nation came out with a very positive endorsement of Clinton. It wasn't, yes, she's part of the oligarchy, but it's better this part than that part. It was like, oh, but she has all these good values or something. That voice needs to be there, otherwise it just is not authentic.
Well, yes, that's right. And I was on the platform committee of the Democratic Party, had the honor of representing Senator Sanders. And so I was in Orlando when they fashioned the most progressive platform in history. And on the issue of health policy, it was not the most progressive platform in history. I think Harry Truman's platform was more progressive, for example, as was Bill Clinton's in '92 on that question. So there was a lot made about that platform. But the problem was, no, you couldn't convince people that she meant it. And so, yeah, I would say that Bernie did the right thing on the basis of he got the best deal he could on the issues that had animated his campaign and that his constituency cared about. And so he did the best job he could in that platform, given the constraints by the Clinton campaign that I saw viscerally, live in action. So, but the problem wasn't him, right? The problem was he is a principal person campaigning for that program, which she probably really didn't believe in. And then also, you're right, tactical reasons. I mean, the African-American constituency was not really up for criticizing President Obama in any way. And so given the dynamics in the primary where that was already a constituency that he had trouble with, going after the president would just compound the problem. So that was the dynamic there, I think. Is there going to be a spokesperson? Can there be a spokesperson that would unify the left or would really resonate, with the Bernie constituency other than Bernie? I don't know, but right now we have Bernie, so let's see how far we can go with that, is what I would say.
Then he has to come out and kind of honestly say that, this corporate leadership of the Democratic Party is a section of the oligarchy. They're not going to come out against themselves.
No.
So there's a
right.
big, if you want, for want of any other words, there's going to need to be a real class struggle within the Democratic Party. And he more or less has to say that. He talks about the billionaire class. Well, who the hell's running the Democratic Party?
Right. I think he did say that. I think he did
before he
during
lost.
the primary. Yeah, I think he did during the primary. Look, he's supporting Keith Ellison for DNC chair. That's a signal.
So is Chuck Schumer.
Right, which is also a signal.
Makes you wonder.
Well, you know why? Because Chuck Schumer actually wants to be majority leader in 2018 and realizes that the party has to have a populist economic justice message. Schumer's not stupid. It may be opportunistic, I don't know, but I think that's good because I think that the so-called establishment of the party, which is real, needs to understand that they are the part of the problem. And we need somebody who is not part of that cabal. And I think Keith Ellison is probably as close as we're going to get. And he's a very principled legislator and activist who believes in a people's movement, who supports the Robin Hood tax as his bill, to tax Wall Street to fund human needs programs. So this is a guy who gets it, who understands what the Democratic message should be.
The 7 leading climate scientists just a few weeks ago came out with a report, this is prior to the election, saying that if all the countries that pledged in Paris, the Paris Climate Agreement, fulfill 100% of all their pledges, we are still hitting 2 degrees warming by 2050, 34 years from now. Well, that's all now blown up because there's no question the United States can't. I mean, Trump wants, and his gang want to rip up the whole Paris Agreement. He appointed a climate denier as head of energy policy. And the people backing him, people like Robert Mercer, and on the transition team is Mercer's daughter, Rebecca Mercer, fund climate denial institutes all over the country. With that urgency, the 2018 elections become of extreme urgency. But 2 things. Still, hardly anybody's talking about climate change. And as far as I know you guys, you're sympathetic to it, but it ain't your issue.
Well, it is our issue.
Is it?
Yeah, it is our issue.
Well,
we definitely think
okay,
it is
then
our issue.
good.
Yeah.
Then, and this issue of 2018 of electing a Congress and getting this message, not just the urgency on the economic situation, but climate change and the potential for war. We elected, I don't even want to say we, because I didn't do it. Yeah. A gang that want a regime change in Iran, and the danger of that is extreme. So between these things,
we're going to have to do a much better job, Paul, that we didn't do during the Bernie campaign of integrating a critique of war making and the military-industrial complex into our critique of domestic policy, and the demand for economic justice must be global. And we, in the union, very much articulated as environmental justice demand. And that really has to be, it's the justice movement, but it has to be much more inclusive of international issues and much more explicit about the war economy and its impact. But on climate, we face an existential crisis. And there isn't a recognition of that. But we have felt very strongly in agreement with Naomi Klein, who, of course, you've worked with extensively here at The Real News, that it takes a systemic transformation in order to save the planet, that you cannot have the existing model of neoliberal capitalist growth if you are going to actually stop the climate crisis. And so, therefore, these demands make perfect sense. But the reason that we emphasize jobs and green jobs and just transition is because we have to speak to those white working class voters, 34% of the electorate, majority of whom, he won I think white guys by 39 points. It's still 70% of the electorate are white folks. And so we have to speak to those people in those communities who have been devastated by trade and loss of manufacturing jobs and desperation over anything, any kind of job. And so we can't just talk about climate as we've been talking about it. We have to talk about it in a different way.
well, I think it's got to be talked about together with jobs, no
Exactly.
doubt. And a new green economy and all that is the way out of this, one hopes. But there's a kind of a, for political expediency, certainly Obama and Clinton, to the extent one assumes they believe the science, but they just never thought there'd be any political bang for the buck, so they didn't pursue it. There's just a lack of urgency.
There's a lack of urgency.
I mean, we've been critiquing the media. In 2015, all the major networks together, I believe the number was, did 149 minutes of coverage on climate change in the year 2015. ABC did 13 minutes. And those minutes include Fox. So when they're doing it, they're essentially denouncing,
Right.
spreading the Dow. There's this number that's been thrown around, which is that 70% of Americans now believe in global warming. And people have heard that number and they say, oh, okay, the battle over this is over. But there's some other numbers buried in there that don't get talked about. 53% of the people that believe there is global warming, according to a Yale study, don't believe it was caused by humans. Only half of that 70% actually believe in human-caused global warming. And then when they're asked, do you think this is a serious problem that will affect you?
Right.
That number is 16%. So, the Koch brothers, Mercer, this doubt machine's been very effective, and that's why it's not politically expedient.
That's right.
Of course, President Obama had the bully pulpit, and he could have given some sense of urgency to this and really paid lip service, more or less, to it. The sense of urgency about climate and the issue of jobs, they don't get married together very much.
No, they don't.
It's not affecting public
And
opinion.
in fact, it was even worse. Remember when SolarCity went belly up? That was like a sign of, industrial policy gone wrong, and that it was just another government bailout. And so the whole green economy got tainted, in a sense, by that. What was it? It wasn't SolarCity. It was.
I forget the name.
Yeah, I
I
forget
know
the
what
name.
you're talking about.
So that is part of the problem. But you're right. There hasn't been. We had 300,000 people in New York, right? The People's Climate March, and yet there hasn't been a appropriate elevation of the issue, despite there has been some mass action, and yet it hasn't been elevated. So you have to wonder what it's going to take to cut through that. And from our view, it's going to take a mass movement, even much greater than we have now, and young people understanding that their future, their literal ability to breathe, is on the line now. And that, I think, but again, what you talk about, a united front, whatever issue you come in with, you engage with others. And what we realized to the People's Summit, we articulated this, we've known it for a while, we can't win any of our issues unless we fight for all of them. And that principle has to animate the fight now.
Now, this issue of talking specifically to sections of the white working class that are voting Republican, it's not new.
Right.
I mean, it's not like this didn't happen with Romney and before, the enthusiasm about Palin. I mean, this can be exaggerated. I think the majority of the Republican vote is not working class vote, as far as I understand it. It's just that there's enough to make a difference. And in this election, there was 20% more. What are you guys going to do? I mean, how are you going to change how you're talking to those sections of the white working class?
Well, I think that's one of the things I was trying to articulate here was we're going to talk more about jobs. We want to talk more about...
But that in itself is not new. I mean, everyone talks about jobs. Right?
Well, I don't know that the climate movement has spent a lot of time talking about how we're going to transform the energy industry, and what is going to happen to those workers. I don't think we've spent enough time doing that. And we haven't put it in an overall perspective. You see, this is the other argument. Neoliberalism is this contained ideology that is pretty straightforward at this point. What's the competing ideology? Is it social democracy of the European style? Well, what's that now? So what is the new alternative to neoliberalism? I think that's what we're trying to formulate, and that's what we believe. But again, caring, community compassion, a value-based politics, Heal America. These are the kinds of things, new constituencies, leadership from nurses who people respect and have very positive feelings toward. Workers like that, other leaders with that kind of credibility need to come forward, but we think nurses play a unique role in that. And so we have a number of Republican members. We operate and organize in red states. So we think there's a lot of opportunity there. And what we found was, like when we talk about Medicare, don't give Medicare to Wall Street. That's the privatization program. Always get back to who are the puppet masters behind the puppet, President Trump. It's Wall Street still, even though, maybe I'm arm's length with Wall Street. No, you're a part of that. How do we expose that? You mentioned Robert Mercer. How do we expose his role? Those are the kinds of things we have to get to, that these people are not who you think they are, and here is a program that will meet your needs.
Okay, to be continued. I hope you'll join us again.
I hope so, too.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.